Hey, so who are you cheering for in the Olympics? Like, what team? What country?
Lithuania.
Really?
I'm a big Lithuania fan. I always have been.
And what events is Lithuania participating in?
Thanks. Mostly sheaf throwing.
Yes.
They throw a lot of sheaves. And the Lithuanians are known for that. People think it's a Scottish thing, but really Lithuanians invented that.
That's good. I've missed that coverage. It must be on like in a NBC like 6.
It is. It's NBC 8 and it's 3 in the morning. So the math can be hard.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. Well, I'm cheering for America because I'm American. And
are you cheering for America in everything?
Yeah.
You know, I think we should do a podcast on why the water turned green. Did you ever see that?
Yes, that is crazy.
It's actually this amazing story
where
a poor Brazilian pool attendant put 100 gallons of hydrogen peroxide into a pool full of chlorine. And if you're a chemistry nerd, you know that those things then cancel each other out. And then the pool filled with algae.
That's crazy. I did hear that hydrogen peroxide was put in, but I didn't know if it was on purpose, if it was like a mistake.
It was on purpose?
I also read that in Atlanta, they asked the Atlanta Olympics folks, like, how come that didn't happen in Atlanta? And they actually used like huge chunks of ice to keep the temperature down.
Really?
So that the algae wouldn't form. Yeah.
That's hilarious. We ice everything in Atlanta. We ice tea. We ice swimming pools. Everything.
Coca-Cola.
Can I just say, before we introduce our guest tonight, and we have a great show where we're going to dig into Flint.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of water.
Oh yeah, that's right. But we can't ice that water because we're not going to drink it because it's a bad idea. My favorite thing is that he works for a program at Florida State University where we just found out they have a drone certificate.
Yeah. Drone Watch? Is the Drone Watch music queued up?
Wait, I'm going to find it.
Drone Watch.
There we go.
Drone Watch.
Man, yeah, I really want a certificate in drone.
It's our new life
technology.
goal. Do you think Brad will help us get a certificate
I hope
in drones?
so. We have an inside track now.
Brad, are you there?
Yes.
Welcome, Brad. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us more about this drone program before we get into the real...
That's right. We're going to totally talk about something we weren't at all going to talk about just because we're fascinated by it.
Well, I have to start off by saying that I will be drawn and quartered if I don't call it the Unmanned Aerial Systems Program, the UAS program.
I got
Yeah,
you. I like
right.
that. That does sound more official.
Sure, the drone program.
Wow.
So,
as you guys said, I'm sorry, it's a certificate program with Florida State University, teaching students really just how to use drones in emergency management for response, recovery, mitigation, really everything.
Wow.
And you actually get to fly drones. You get stick time with the drones.
You do get stick time, a lot of stick time. You actually, you fly them, and you also develop a deliverable for a local agency and fly an actual mission and give them actual work.
That's
because
awesome.
Of it.
That is amazing.
And there's so much stick time involved.
Yeah.
And yeah, I heard that the next Top Gun that's coming out is all about drones. It is. I'm serious.
You're lying.
No, it really is. It's like because drone pilots are taking over from the regular like F-14 pilots.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all about drones all the time.
Well, be looking forward to that movie. Wow.
So we should introduce you, Brad. You want to take it?
Yeah. So Brad's a teaching faculty with the program of Emergency Management and Homeland Security at Florida State University. He's got a bachelor's degree in political science from Eckerd College and a master's in international affairs from FSU. He teaches Introduction to Terrorism, Public Health, Homeland Security courses, and his research focuses around self-radicalization and terrorism, and he's presented at conferences all over the world. So, Brad, it's really a pleasure to have you on, and we're excited to talk about the Flint water crisis tonight.
I am too.
And can I just say, so you teach at my former alma mater, and you actually went to undergrad at my parents' alma mater because they both went to Eckerd when it was Florida Presbyterian. I know this is something nobody out there is going to care about, but it's amazing to me. So right
the
on.
few of us that do know do care.
That's right. Everybody loves St. Petersburg, baby. Okay. So, all right. So we're going to talk about Flint. And to my mind, and in the little reading we've done about it, Flint is, to me, one of the sort of the worst crises that we've seen in this country. Although people don't think of it as an emergency management situation in the same way because it wasn't an acute crisis, it caused significant harm to infrastructure, to health, all kinds of stuff. And so I guess, Brad, can you just give us a thumbnail, just walk us through sort of the big picture of what actually happened in Flint, Michigan?
Sure. It is a really complicated story, but from 30,000 feet, basically Flint decided to start drawing its water from the Flint River, and they didn't properly treat it. And when it entered into the lead pipe system that Flint had, it ended up corroding the lead and introducing that lead into the water. That then got into the water that everyone eats and drinks and bathes and does everything in. So it ended up being about pretty much the entire population of Flint, about 100,000 residents, were exposed to dangerous levels of lead. I mean, really no lead is safe, but these exceeded every mandate, every federal law, every local law. These levels all exceeded them.
And so why was the decision made to switch to draw water from the Flint River versus the water source that they were using before that?
To sound crass, it was all money.
Wow.
Flint was beyond broke and in massive debt, and the financial emergency manager who was in charge of the city determined that they would save about $19 million over 10 years if they switched to an alternate water source. And the Flint River is actually just supposed to be used for 2 years before another pipeline was built. And that's really all it came down to. The city was broke, and they needed to find a way to save money on their water bill.
So the pipes, the lead pipes, this is one of the things that I've wondered about. The pipes were always lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even before they switched the water supply. So what was it about this new water supply that caused the corrosion in the lead that contaminated the drinking water?
Well, yeah, lead pipes are really common all over the country. You can actually, USA Today did a really good report on where there are lead pipes. So you can actually look that up. But lead pipes in themselves aren't really a problem. It's only a problem when the water starts to corrode the lead, which then gets brought into someone's home. So Flint wasn't treating the water to the point they needed to. They weren't bringing that corrosion level down. And it just ate away at the pipes, the existing pipes. Beforehand, they were buying water basically from Detroit, treated water from Detroit, and it was treated to the point where the corrosion was low enough that it wasn't affecting the pipes, and so it was safe.
So so this water was more corrosive and untreated. So did they know that before it switched over? Was there not a testing process where they tested the water, they tested the pipes, they made sure it was safe?
That is going to be one of the things that comes out in all these lawsuits. Who knew what when? But the science behind this has been monitored by the EPA since 1991. So this wasn't anything new or nothing that couldn't be. I mean, they knew the water had to be tested. For some reason, the EPA waived their existing rules that required the water to be tested before it was delivered out to the homes, and they let Flint have 2 6-month periods of monitoring and reevaluation before they actually were supposed to take actions if they needed to because of lead. But there's no reason why these anti-corrosive steps couldn't have been taken by Flint. It may have been a money thing. It may have been an ignorance thing. I don't know. Again, we'll probably know more as time goes on. But it was a completely avoidable crisis.
So if I understand that right, they were supposed to test the water before releasing it to the general public for a period of time, and the EPA said you don't have to do that. You can just switch the water sources over.
As I read it,
guys.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So how long did this take to be? So I was reading that this was declared a state of emergency by President Obama in sort of January of 2016. So when did it actually start? I mean, you have a hurricane, like it's approaching, or maybe a few hours in, you get a state of emergency. How long did this go on before there was a formal emergency declaration?
Well, the official switchover was on April 5th, 2014. so just shy of 2 years earlier than that. Then people immediately were telling the city that their water looked and smelled and tasted horrible. They didn't know it was lead, obviously, but I mean, you can see those really famous pictures of water, and it's just like yellow or orange. Like you know something's wrong with that. And the EPA's first test was done in December of 2014. So they switched to Flint water on April 25th, and it wasn't until December that they actually got their tests back and found these insane levels of lead in the water.
So why didn't they just switch it over then? Or did they switch it off at that point? Did they switch them back to the other water supply?
They couldn't just switch that quick. There's a whole lot of politics behind it and money behind it. The EPA did order Flint to start doing corrosion control. When they checked up on them in February, they told them to start doing it in December. In February, they checked up on them, and Flint still hadn't done corrosion control. And as best as I could tell, Flint didn't really even start doing corrosion control until those disasters were declared in like late 2015.
Oh my God!
Well, and I imagine when you're dealing with this much water, this much volume of water, even if you started on day one, I mean, it takes some time to get through the system and to make an effect. I would think.
So I guess my question. So we know then you're saying that there's no debate about whether the water was damaging. I mean, because there are these two issues. There's this thing about, people said, well, just because it smelled bad, tasted bad, was brown, whatever, it wasn't necessarily bad for you. But you're saying that science actually wasn't in doubt. Like from fairly early on, it was determined that it was a public health risk. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the testing showed that. Part of these lawsuits that are going to be coming out, these criminal cases, is going to be determining who knew what and when. But as I said, the science behind this, you need to control corrosion in lead pipes, has existed. There's been this rule called the lead and copper rule since 1991. So this isn't a surprise that you need to be monitoring this and watching for this. And that bad water that people were tasting and smelling, part of that was the metals that were being stripped by this corrosive water coming from the Flint River. And part of it also, on a whole nother disgusting public health level, they found high levels of coliform bacteria, like fecal bacteria, in the city's water that wasn't being treated as well for a couple months.
Okay, so I'm a little speechless. I'm having a hard time. E. coli fecal matter always kind of puts a dent in my
yeah.
Here's the thing. So in Dukes of Hazzards, we like to put on the hat of the emergency manager, right, and dig into sort of what happened from a sympathetic point of view, right? What happened? So why was it just that nobody was receiving those warnings? Was the city so broke that there was no infrastructure, no sort of public servants left to hear that warning and act on it? Why was this decision-making process so slow?
Again, I think we're going to know more. Part of the problem was the fact that the government is really in turmoil. As I said, they had this financial emergency manager who was in charge of the city. He was installed by the state of Michigan. And his name was Michael Brown, not the Michael Brown of Katrina infamy, a totally different person.
Can we just say nobody should name anybody Michael Brown
no
anymore?
more Michael Browns in the world.
I know. I had to look that up. I'm like, oh, please, not that Michael Brown.
That would be he would be like the Forrest Gump of disasters, just bouncing from terrible things.
Just an aside, he's on Fox. He's on a Fox News program tonight talking about the Louisiana Baton Rouge floods.
Oh, really?
I follow him on Twitter. He's pretty interesting on Twitter. Anyway, sorry, back to...
I feel like for some reason he and Anthony Weiner should get together. I feel like a Michael Brown-Anthony Weiner combo would be great.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, let's just set that up.
Yeah, we can't make it any worse.
That's right.
Probably we can. It's possible that could do. But anyway, back to Flint, Michael Brown. What? Brad?
Are you there, Brad? Uh-oh. Michael Brown cut our feed.
It's because we brought him up.
This happens every time we criticize some federal government or person.
That's right. We never ever.
They cut our line.
I think if in 20 years we discover that the NSA actually is bugging us,
Michael Brown's in charge.
That
of
would
the
be
NSA.
Michael Brown. Suddenly we see him.
Cut the feed.
He's sitting in like a rolling chair, and then he just spins around and he's holding a cat. He's like stroking the cat. He's like, I've been behind this all along, Dukes of Hazzards. Brad, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes. Nice.
I'm just trying to picture that.
We think Michael Brown might have cut our feed.
Yeah. If you say the name, it's being monitored and they cut it off.
That's
Exactly.
right. But anyway, back when we were doing a serious investigative journalism here. So Michael Brown in Flint. So what happened?
He's the fiscal
he
emergency
takes over
manager set up by the state, right?
Yeah, it's really important to stress that he's the financial emergency manager. His title was emergency manager, but he wasn't like a DEM, FEMA kind of person. But he was in charge of the city, and he was basically like as close to a dictator as you can get in the American system. He basically had power above every elected official. And understandably, his main decision-making was Flint needs to save money, which works at a lot of levels, but doesn't really work on the health aspect of things. You should kind of spend whatever you need to spend to keep people healthy, keep lead out of the water. So I think maybe part of the problem was this focus on the financials. And if you read about what was going on in Flint at the time, there were these constant battles with the elected officials and Michael Brown over who had the authority to do what and who was loyal to whom. And so the city was just in turmoil and just being led solely on the idea of we need to save money.
So was this being talked about as an issue? So are you saying that it was raised within Flint, but it was sort of shut down, or that it never came to political consciousness in the city?
The timing's hard to determine. I mean, a couple of those lawsuits criminal cases have been filed, talked about people who were tampering with evidence and conspiring to tamper with evidence. So it's possible, if these guys are found guilty, that they knew potentially all along this was a problem or a hazard. So they turned on the Flint River on April 25th, and in March, the city council voted to reconnect to the old system, to the Detroit system.
March of next year, March of 2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we're still looking at a year's lapse.
Yeah.
But they tried to take action and got shut down by the new financial manager at the time, who was Jerry Ambrose. So the elected officials were trying to do something, but they were hampered by this strange political structure that existed.
There's also the fact that there sounds like there was no money, right? So here's the problem we have. Here's what it's going to take to solve the problem, but you don't have the resource to implement the solution.
So in like real emergency management doctrine, right, at that case, what they would do is they would say, all right, we have a water contamination issue. We can't afford it. Let's go to the state, right? Let's raise this as an issue to the state and try and get surge resources. So when did
but
the
there's
state...
no activation, right? I mean, we're talking a day-to-day thing, not an emergency
situation. Let's talk about that first. In the city, was there ever a realization that this was a crisis? Like whether or not they could deal with it, that it was raised to crisis proportions? I mean, I just want to say I saw a picture of like a nail that was exposed to this water, and it was like a gross nail. So I don't want to imagine what it would do to an actual stomach. So did people think it was a crisis?
I mean, for a long time. I mean, citizens had been reporting this water. They had been doing their own private testing and sending water to a couple of universities, like the University of Virginia was one of the primaries. And interestingly, I found this little bit. In October of 2014, a few months after we flipped over, a GM plant in Flint actually stopped using the water because it was corroding their car parts.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you can imagine, they're watching metal being corroded before it even leaves their, assembly line, and yet people are drinking this at the same time.
So this isn't just kind of onesie, twosies, crazy citizens coming forth saying the water's bad. I mean, this is kind of across the board. Companies, commercial, scientists, researchers, citizens are all saying this is bad.
But if I'm a bureaucrat, and I guess In real life, I am a bureaucrat, although I'm not right now.
Hypothetically.
But I can imagine myself saying, I can't actually, but let's just pretend for the sake of argument. Okay, guys, so it corrupts, what's the word? Corrodes, thank you, metal. That doesn't mean that it's actually bad for people, right? Because it only corrodes metal because it's exposed to it for long periods of time, so it causes extra rust. That's not actually bad for you. Until the lead findings came out, was that part of the argument, that even though it's corrosive, that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for people?
Yeah, well, for a long time, city officials continually said the water's safe, the water's safe, the water's safe.
Yeah.
How much they knew that to be true or not, I think we'll find out with these criminal cases. But they were telling residents, don't worry about it, keep drinking it, keep using it, the water's safe.
So what made it go to the state? What triggered it to become to go kind of jump up a level in response?
There was testing done by Virginia Tech. I said University of Virginia first. So Tech was doing the testing, and they found lead in multiple homes, and it was really clear data that conflicted with what the city was putting out. But it wasn't until October of 2015 that they really finally asked the state for help. And the state pretty quickly agreed to help fund that cost of switching back to Detroit water. But we're looking at a year and a half. They had been on Flint River water at that point.
Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine as a parent finding out for 18 months your, child has been drinking elevated levels of... I mean, that's just devastating.
So you're saying the state was pretty responsive at that point?
At that point, the evidence was pretty overwhelming,
Okay.
and the elected officials in Flint were trying desperately hard in March to make a switch back, but they were just denied it by this strange political structure.
So how was that? And this is because we're just deeply in the weeds about it. How were they denied? So did the dictator of Flint at that point decide to send it back to Michigan? Like the dictator was on board but still couldn't make it happen?
Yeah, I went and found a quote by him. It was Jerry Ambrose at the time, and he called this request. The city council had to make a request to be put back on Detroit water, and he said that the request was incomprehensible. And he said that the city is saving $12 million a year by not being connected to Detroit, and that $12 million a year could be spent somewhere else to better effect.
Interesting. So it's like, does he not understand the science? Did he not understand what was happening? Was he just blinded by the fact that they're saving $12 million a year now?
Because at that point, the Virginia Tech results were known, right? That would have been after that testing.
Yeah, some of their initial tests, yeah. I mean, they had an EPA test at this point and found that it was a problem.
So what was the... because again, the emergency management aspect is how do you have good decision making? So what got in the way? So just as sympathetically talking about the dictator of Flint as possible, right? How did that information not get to him? Was it packaged in did the EPA never release a local, do you know anything about that chain of decisions and why it failed?
To be honest, no. And I mean, as every day I've been looking into Flint, every day I ask myself, how could this have ever gotten this far? It didn't ever have to be a crisis in the first place if they just treated the water correctly.
Right.
And and to me, health, especially something as deadly or as damaging as lead, supersedes costs. You make up the costs when you have to, as long as your people aren't being poisoned by lead. But I don't know yet what Jerry Ambrose knew at the time. But at the time, they were so focused on saving money that it seemed to take precedent over everything.
Wow, that's interesting. I don't know, but I doubt he's an evil person. Like, I doubt he had all the evidence and saw babies getting sick and said, screw it, we're saving,
Yeah.
And I'd love to know that decision process of what information didn't get to him or why they decided to not switch back.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, that he wasn't purposely poisoning children.
Right.
But, if he believed that maybe the science was questionable or maybe the results weren't 100%, then maybe he could in good conscience say, well, I'm not going to make a drastic, huge financial decision on imperfect science or results that aren't perfectly clear, even though they seem to be perfectly clear. He may have been being told by these people who now have criminal charges, the EPA is wrong or Virginia Tech is wrong, our tests show it's fine, so he's listening to his people telling him that it's fine.
Right, which could be a mistake any of us would make.
That's right. We don't have to assume that he's the main character in a new version of A Christmas Carol or something like that.
Exactly.
We've mentioned a couple of agencies. I'm just curious, if we could list who the major players are. We mentioned the EPA was doing some water testing and involved in what regulations they should follow. The Flint environmental health, I guess the city of Flint had an environmental department that was in charge of the water. Is that right, Kevin?
I don't know the actual title, but they had people who were in charge of it. They had one of the people that was actually had a criminal case charging us in July was in charge of water for Flint. Okay. And another one of the big people that have been charged so far have been with the actual Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, who was supposed to be overseeing these tests, and they've been charged with misconduct and tampering with evidence.
So this is the reason that's terrifying as a public servant, right? A lot of reasons, but because it's a whole group of people. This isn't one person that's been charged. This sounds like an entire chain of command that's being charged with criminal intent.
And different agencies, different departments, different agencies.
Yeah, so is it incompetence? Yeah. Is it collusion? What are these charges?
They're largely for misconduct and tampering with evidence. A couple are being charged with willful neglect. Some of them are being charged with covering things up or pushing others to cover up results or cover up work.
Wow.
I don't have them all in front of me, all the different things they've been charged with. But there's multiple charges against at least so far 9 people, and the governor has said that this will continue to go on and they will charge everyone they have to charge.
Honestly, the fact that it's too many people and too many charges to easily keep track of, that's a good indication that there's probably a problem in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So did this ever become an emergency? The way we as emergency managers think of it as an emergency. Was there a response that came in? Were there additional resources? What happened that made this sort of work like an emergency?
Flint declared an emergency in December of 2015, and then Obama declared it in January of 2016. So that's when FEMA started rolling in with the money and the water, basically.
Bottled water, we're saying, or tanker trucks of water.
Yeah, and they also handed out lots of filters you can snap onto your water faucets, and lots of pitchers as well that would filter out the lead.
Oh wow!
Having dealt with those before, and this is incredibly. For all those loggies out there, everybody that's a logistics geek. So those lead filters, I think, have a 2-week cycle time. So every 2 weeks you have to switch them out because they get suffused with lead. Wow. I don't know, Brad, but to me that was something that you had to just keep doing. It wasn't like a one-time fix. It was like a continuous supply chain after that.
Yeah, the numbers I found from FEMA said they had to give out about 243,000 individual cartridges, like those replaceable filters, just to people to allow them to keep using it over time.
And did they do it just for drinking faucets, or did they do it for showers and stuff too?
Technically, you have to ingest lead.
Yeah.
You can't. It doesn't go through your skin, so technically you can bathe in it and you'll be okay. But we all get water in our mouths when we shower, and if you have a kid that ever takes a bath, it's a constant battle to get them to not drink the water.
Yeah, right.
I get most of my 4 liters every day from my shower.
Bathing,
I just drink during the shower.
Water.
Yeah,
that's good.
There you go.
And plus there's the fact that if you've been lied to for a year and a half by the government, and then the government has come being like, here's a water filter that'll clean all the water. I would be like, screw you. I'm not taking anything else from the government. But I guess if that's the only option. These poor people, I'm just thinking, that now have to oh, great, I have to trust the government again that's been lying to me for a year?
Yeah. And there were millions and millions of liters of water delivered by FEMA, and all these celebrities got on board and started delivering water and stuff. But it never really exceeded demand. I mean, a couple times they had a couple warehouses full of water, but still today, people, as you said, they still don't trust the government. Even though the government says the water is now clean to drink, they're still not doing it. They're still using bottled water and using those filters and stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting long-term implication of this whole thing.
And was there any distinction made between, if you're a citizen in Flint, do you blame the locals? Do you blame the state? Do you blame the federal government? Like, is there a clear distinction of responsibility between the different federal jurisdictions?
To be honest, I don't know. That'd be an interesting kind of case study asking people. But I would imagine a lot of the blame is on Flint itself. And of course, the EPA has responsibility because they kind of didn't, they were a little bit lax. They didn't I would say they didn't come down with a hammer like they should have when they got those first results. I think the blame can be spread all the way around, all through the city, the state, and really even up to the EPA.
Now, is it true that FEMA at first denied the request for federal assistance because it wasn't tied to a specific natural disaster or man-made disaster?
Yeah, the way the laws are written, that you can't declare it a disaster if it's not a natural disaster. They're considered to be states of emergency.
Yeah.
So it was just a kind of a silly paperwork, but illegal kind of snafu about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if Jay Johnson happens to be listening, who's the director of Homeland Security, number one policy problem in the United States these days is the way the Stafford Act is written to focus on acute natural disasters rather than other things that critically impact health and well-being in the short term.
I mean, from their perspective, though, if you didn't have it written like that, you would have any structural problem. I mean, cities would start applying for federal disaster money for everything, right? Every problem that they have.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, but you could just deny them. You could just have a guy in Homeland Security who was like, no, like all the time.
Stamp.
Yeah, red stamp's
That's
important.
what I hope to be.
A federal, it needs to cost like $10,000 though, like a really, really nice, shiny federal government no stamp.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Talking about federal waste.
So what happened, what I remember about this is that then in 2016, when apparently this had been going on for almost 2 years, it suddenly became a political darling, right? Mm-hmm. People were opening campaign stops there. It became like a political issue. Did that politicization affect this at all? Did it get more focus on it? Was it helpful? Did it just get in the way? What happened with that?
I would argue it was probably helpful. We had all that attention. We had all that water being delivered. Michigan and Flint were put under a lot of pressure to be proactive and to be truthful in their reporting. But the federal state of emergency was actually declared over on August 14th, Sunday. But as you said, people still don't trust the water. They're still not drinking it and using it as everyone normally does with water. So the crisis continues and will likely continue. I mean, I don't even know how many years people are not going to trust Flint water.
Yeah, right. I mean, and also just this city that was once, a big, grand, proud city, to have to deal with the financial, economic downturn and then this on top of it, it's hard to imagine it recovering.
Well, let's talk about the underlying structure. Well, first, is it recovered? Is scientifically this over?
There have been testings done. I think it was actually VTech again that did the testing because no one trusted the government anymore. And they found that the water was at acceptable levels. I think it's like 3 parts per billion. I think it's up to 3 parts per billion is the acceptable level, I think. And it was below that threshold. So the water was declared basically as safe as it was before, safe enough to drink.
And they're still on the Flint River water supply, but they've instituted additional corrosion control, or they've switched to the Detroit water system?
No, they're back on Detroit.
Okay.
That was back in October of 2015. They switched back.
Okay.
And aren't they also replacing a lot of the cast iron pipes? I don't know if that, I saw a video of big water mains being replaced. I don't know if that was just for show or if they're doing that all throughout the city.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to, but, I mean, as you can imagine, this is an entire city's water system that would need to be replaced. I think the governor recently came out and said the cost of replacing the pipes could be at least $60 million and take at least 15 years.
Wow.
But let me I was just putting this together. So you're saying that by the time FEMA rolled in with the bottled water and the water tankers, they had already been on Detroit water supply for like 3 months at that point.
Yes. Yeah. October to January. Yeah.
Okay. So they're really, so from a scientific perspective, this was already done by then.
I don't know if I would declare it done, but it was being brought down to healthy, manageable levels.
Okay, because the pipes were still the same. So the corrosion that had been caused in the pipes by the other water supply was still kind of in play. Is that?
Yeah, and these part of the corrosion controls is using, I gotta find the name, some organophosphates that kind of make like a seal over the pipe that keeps the water separate from the wall of the pipe. And it takes a long time to build. It's called scaling, to build that like seal back up over the pipe, or actually inside the pipe. Excuse me.
So I guess there are two things, right, that I've seen in other jurisdictions. Number one is this credibility thing, like, screw you, government, we no longer trust you. And the other is this issue of pipes themselves, right, that these are common. Is this happening other places? Is it something we should be worried about nationally going forward?
Worried about, I don't know, but aware of for sure. I mentioned earlier that USA Today, they actually have a website where you can put in your zip code, and it will tell you if they found lead in the levels of your zip code. And it was a pretty sizable portion of the country had detectable levels, not necessarily dangerous levels according to the EPA, but detectable levels of lead. And anyone in public health will tell you any level of lead is not good for public health, especially for children. But EPA guidelines, at least, a fair amount of the country has detectable lead, but at a safe, quote, level.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know in New York City, children are tested at 1 and maybe 3 for lead. My 1-year-old just had that done, the blood test for lead. And then also you can send water samples to the city health department, and they will actually test it and send back to you results. So every time we move apartments, we send water to the good old city Department of Health for that.
Yeah, you can be really proactive. I mean, I tested the water coming out of my tap after Flint. And you can look up your providers. They have to do an annual report on the water quality, the Consumer Confidence Report. So you can ask for that and look at it and see what controls are taking and what the levels of lead are in the water in your area right now.
So I've seen this in several places that they've started to change out the infrastructure. Do you think generally there is a problem with pipe infrastructure in the country as well? We've talked about a lot of different bridge infrastructure, highway infrastructure. Are the pipes that we use also old and starting to affect our health in general?
Well, I think I read the EPA estimated that anywhere between 7 to 10 million homes have water that's delivered by lead pipes at some point in the delivery process. Sometimes they're the main lines to utilities. Sometimes they're the individual lines going to your house that are lead. But if your water provider is taking the precautions, keeping the corrosion down, they're adding these orthophosphates to put that scaling along the pipes, it really doesn't have to be a problem. You need to monitor it. You have to hope that your water providers on top of things and they're doing their own testing and that the EPA is being listened to and enforcing these rules. So it's not inherently a public health threat. It's a true hazard. It could become something if our continual vigilance isn't upheld.
So what I'm doing now is I'm frantically Googling to try and find this USA Today lead level search
to enter your zip code.
Yeah, just to see if my zip code, and I can't find it. So we do have to post this. Yeah. I think to our website.
I hope I'm right. It was USA Today.
I think you just assume every pipe in Brooklyn is lead line.
Really? Don't tell me that. Don't tell me that.
I think you have to. I think also one thing I think of is like as bureaucrats, as emergency managers. It's almost like there needs to be courses taught on how to deliver bad news to leadership, how to make sure that they understand the implications of things and that they act accordingly. I don't know if that's a communication class that emergency managers need to take, but it's important that leadership and executives know kind of the ramifications of decisions, whether good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So Brad, when you checked out your water, did you find elevated lead?
No, it was fine. And I went and looked up. I live in Tallahassee at FSU, and my water's from TalGov, and they have this pretty big statement on their website that they don't use any lead pipes whatsoever, and the water that comes from our aquifer is naturally low in corrosiveness. So I'm lucky to live in a place where it really isn't a problem. It's possible there could be some lead piping or lead solder in my home, but it's not enough to become a health hazard.
Yeah, that's I've heard that the issue in New York City is that the big 20-inch, 10-inch, I don't know how big they are, water mains are fine, but it's the last 20 feet coming into these old houses that were built in the 1800s, that those are sometimes cast iron or soldered, the connection joints using lead solder, that's really the issue. But that's why you can get your water tested, and every child gets blood tests here.
Yeah. I mean, they can all be monitored. You have to be proactive about it. You have to kind of hold your officials accountable. But it's really not something that's complicated. I mean, the science is very well known and very well established, and the response is well established, and it should be something that never becomes a crisis.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating story, and I'd love to follow it from just a decision making and decision process standpoint. And I hope there are researchers that are looking into this and looking into kind of what decisions were made, why they were made, and from that perspective would be fascinating, just from a learning, so that we can all learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do you think we can learn from it? So from an emergency management perspective, other than sort of don't ignore, terrible warning signs in your water, what do you think we can learn? Don't watch while the world crumbles around you.
Right. It will not go away.
Yeah. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, it is relatively simple. I mean, just kind of stay on top of these testings. I mean, I've said this before, and this really does not have to be a hazard that becomes a crisis or a disaster or an emergency or anything like that. Just be proactive. Read those consumer confidence reports. And I mean, part of it, I remember from your guys' podcast about the food security. You asked the guy from PepsiCo, does he still eat out? And part of it is just kind of, as much as I hate to say it, just a little bit of trust. You can't be terrified of the water coming out of your tap all the time.
Never drink in.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Always buy bottled water for everything.
I actually, so I found the USA Today site in my live Googling there, and it actually is great because it shows you every lead exceedance that EPA has found in the past several years. So you can go county by county and show every place that it's exceeded viable lead levels, none of which are in New York City, by the way.
Really? Brooklyn?
Yeah, but probably because we're it's like artisanal water,
yes.
We've pickled all the water, and so it's just not lead based anymore. But I don't know. It's a terrifying thing at the end of the day. This story is very frightening to me
on many levels. Yeah, the most heartbreaking thing being the innocent kids that were subjected to this for way too long.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to kind of just wait on time to see what these lasting public health effects are. But I think they said at least 5% of Flint's children showed really high level, elevated levels of lead in their blood when they were tested.
So we're going to have to see long-term health effects. And when are we going to know about the lawsuits? When are we going to have more information about what these guys knew and when to see whether there was culpability?
Well, there's about 315 private lawsuits going on right now, so that's going to be a rat's nest. These criminal charges, the first three were released in April of this year, 6 more on July 29th of this year. So they're really in the early phases. I think it's going to be a while, at least a year before we really know anything about who was actually tampering with these tests and what were these financial emergency managers being told.
All right. Well, I'd like to find a positive note to end on, but I guess we're not gonna.
Well, I would say the positive note is, huge swaths of the country, about 10 million homes have lead pipes in a delivery system, but we don't have these problems. I mean, this is something that can be controlled. I mean, you don't have to be afraid of this. I would argue you don't have to be afraid of this.
Always look for the Florida State guy to find the light at the end of the tunnel.
All right, Brad. Well, we really appreciate you coming on tonight. We like to end every show when we have guests on with a lightning round of emergency management questions. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm a professor because I like to give the quizzes, but I will do my best not to cry like my students.
It is payback time for all of your students.
Can we grade him?
Yeah,
I think we should give him a grade.
Usually, there's no right or wrong to these, but I think tonight there's
there are definitely wrong answers.
So first up,
okay.
What's your favorite hazard?
My favorite hazard. I'm a big infectious disease guy.
Wrong.
I think the one that really keeps me up at night is smallpox.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good
one.
Now, is that also the second question? Is what's the hazard that scares you the most?
Probably smallpox. Yeah. Okay. I mean, okay, it's not true. I'm not really scared of smallpox, but that's the kind of thing that if we were to have an outbreak, that I would be barricading my house and sitting there with my shotgun up all night sort of thing.
It's the I Am Legend scenario, right? Where you
absolutely
sleep in the bathtub with your shepherd and a gun.
Yes. Yeah.
Is smallpox the disease that there's only 2 samples of it in the world, one in Russia and one in the U.S. maybe?
Yeah, one in Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah,
where they just had a lab accident, a few months ago. So we're totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah, they stumbled across some wild stains every once in a while in remote Afghanistan and stuff like that. But yeah, you shouldn't be afraid of it. It's one of the only human disease that's declared eradicated in the world.
So just a future episode on the anthrax that just melted out of the Russian permafrost. But still, smallpox scarier.
It's a real thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was the first disaster that you remember? Not necessarily the first disaster that you worked or were a part of, but that you remember.
Oh, geez. The first one that comes to mind was Oklahoma City, 1995.
Yep. Okay, moving on. We don't have.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm not that old, so I can't remember a lot of the older ones. Maybe Hugo. My grandma lives in South Carolina for Hugo.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That was a big one.
Hugo was big. Yeah, a lot of stuff there.
I guess Hugo.
What is your favorite disaster movie?
Disaster movie.
Doesn't necessarily have to be about a disaster.
And you can't say Volcano by Tommy Lee Jones because people just say it too much.
I'm going to play to my audience here and say Ghostbusters.
This is awesome.
Future episode.
Because Ghostbusters is totally a disaster. Both Ghostbusters are really about how a small core team of people professionally respond to a disaster.
Come together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, they have awesome equipment.
Resources.
They have the tools. They have the talent. Then that's good. Mm-hmm. That's good.
What's the best ICS position?
The best what position? I'm sorry.
ICS, Incident Command System position.
Oh, I have no idea. Can I just take a pass on that one?
Yeah, you can just pass that. What's the best emergency management acronym you've ever heard? This is a deep one.
Jeez. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but we have one in our office that is my favorite one. Oh my God, my boss is going to kill me. We say WAGD, W-A-G-D, which is we're all going to die.
I love that. Yeah.
We have to do, when we look, it used to be when we used to go to these exercises, and still a little bit today, and we see, people slipping up, or we see people are like, oh, I didn't have a plan for this, or something like Flint. We're like, oh man, WAGD. Like, we just look at each other and say WAG. So that is in my heart the favorite one.
That's great. I'm going to incorporate that into our exercises. That's good. All right, last one is favorite piece of emergency management gear.
Oh, the biggest, it's got to be those pants, or the responder pants with like the 1,000 pockets.
That's a great answer.
Oh,
that is true. That is a great
We need so many
piece.
more pairs of those pants.
The more pockets, the more experience you have.
That's right.
Yeah.
Every pocket.
Think of all the stuff you can put in all those pockets. I mean, you can put a water testing kit in that pocket.
Yeah.
I love this idea that instead of stars and bars, emergency managers just get more pockets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love slipping on those cargo pants and then sitting in an EOC for 12 hours and not moving. That's just when you need.
Especially because they don't breathe at all and there's nothing useful in the pockets. That's
Exactly.
totally right.
Well, Brad, again, thanks so much for being on the show tonight.
Yeah, it's been great. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your research, especially because it meant that we didn't have to do all the research.
Yeah.
We should have professors on more often because this is our wheelhouse.
So if people want to follow your research or to get in touch with you, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Twitter? Can we go to your school's website?
I would say that probably is our website, em.fsu.edu.
Right.
And that's kind of everything about our staff, about our programs, about all of our courses and all the research and work we do.
Great. We'll do that.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Brad, and good night.
Thanks for having me.
See you, Brad.
Bye.
All right, well, that's all we have this week.
Really,
That was good.
this story is really depressing.
It
I'm
is.
I'm
We
like
gotta figure out how to
legit
end
depressed
these
now.
episodes with like we need a story
Just
arc.
Gonna drink more.
A story arc.
Oh, you
that
mean
comes
we
back
need
up.
like the scene at the end where like the puppy
Yeah.
and the little kid look up and they see the
Right.
sunlight at the end of the
There's
end of
hope.
the world.
Like the hope. Well, I mean, I guess the good ending is that the water is clean again, according to government research. And Virginia Tech.
No, that's good. And I
There's
just want
independent.
well, let's highlight that. I think
Yeah.
Virginia Tech, thank God for Virginia. You know, they
Yeah.
stepped in. There was a gap. They really, I think, did a great deal of public service.
And not just Virginia Tech, but despite
Yeah.
the problems that these multiple agencies had, they were able to come in, get a solution, provide clean water again, and hopefully Flint can pull out of
Oh,
this.
say, can
All right.
you see?
Stick to Lithuania. All right, well, that's it for this episode. Don't forget, we have a phone number that you can call and ask us questions, give us suggestions. The number is 859-429-2731. It'd be really great to get some actual questions and not just robocalls on that line. Tell us what you want to hear. Follow us on Twitter. We're at Hazards Podcast. And then that's it. Tell us what you want to hear.
Yeah, no, it's been good, Andrew.
Thanks.
Take care, man.
It's been great.
If I'm just too sad to
Go
record
USA.
next time. Bye. FSU.